so much for coming today. We have a double bill. So we're going to start with the gallery talk by Gay Outlaw, and then a kind of look at the gallery, and then downstairs in the forward we'll have an actual presentation from Mildred Howard with images. So that's our day today. I also want to say that we have a publication of this exhibition, Gay Outlaw, Mutable Object, that is available in our shop downstairs. So I even have a forward in it, but I hope you will pick up one of these too, and that this exhibition will get you thinking about things that perhaps you can further explore in the catalog. And so I'm going to give you a brief overview of what I know about Gay, and there's more on the walls too. But Gay was born in Mobile, Alabama, and received her BA in 1981 from the University of Virginia. She attended the École de Cuisine La Varenne in Paris, 1981-82, and took courses at the International Center of Photography, 1987 and 88. Her glass work, of which you see in various manifestations here, benefited from 2 Pilchuck residencies in Seattle in 2007 and 2014, and a Tacoma Museum of Glass residency in 2009. She and Mildred Howard are both represented by Anglin Gilbert Gallery in San Francisco, and that is where Gay lives. Her commissions include Dark Matter Redux, sponsored by the Jurassic Foundation in Woodside, California in 1998, and Tinned Wall Dark Matter that was at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in San Francisco, commissioned by the Wallace Alexander Gabodi Foundation in 1995. Her work is in numerous public and private collections, including the Achenbach Foundation for the Graphic Arts at the California Palace of the Legion of Honor, Museum of Glass in Tacoma, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, San Jose Museum of Art, and others. And I know Gay because I was director of the University of Virginia Art Museum and Days of Grad at UVA. So I had the great opportunity to come out to San Francisco soon after I started there and to meet Gay and see what she was doing and get you to do an exhibition and a short residency at UVA when her work in food products was on the floor, and we did a beautiful installation of caramelized sugar. That was really, really great. So just to give you a sense of, which I think you can see in this room, this really unusual exploration of material. So I know you have some opening remarks. I can ask questions and all of you can too, but we have about half an hour and then we will move on to Mildred and her work. So please join me in welcoming Gay.
Thank you all for coming. I wanted to say what a pleasure it's been to work with Jill again, and she's one of my favorite colleagues, I'll say. We've known each other for 25 years, which is amazing, and I'm so grateful for her support over the years. And I've also really enjoyed working with her staff, from the installation crew to press to security staff. Everybody here is really top-notch, and it's been a real pleasure. I just had a couple points I wanted to try to make, and then I'm hoping that you guys will have a lot of questions. That's generally the case, I've found, when I'm in the gallery amongst a show, because this is a pretty typical show for me, where I try to bring together, sculpture-wise at least, a sort of family of pieces that don't immediately have relationships to each other, but the more you kind of hang with them, or certainly the more effort you make, the more they will arise. So when I put together a show, I try to think of pieces that will have a conversation with each other in the gallery. And for instance, and usually the pieces are made out of discrete materials, so they don't overlap too much, because the material conversation is part of it. Part of it is color, part of it is how they interact with space, or here, particularly geometry. Each piece here has some conversation with not a real hard formal geometry, although this one might be there. Some interaction with it. Perforations are something that I put through a lot of my sculptures. I made a very large sculpture many years ago, and I felt like it, in retrospect, it should have had an opening of some kind into the inside. And it's made me think a lot about how important it is to have a sense of the interior space of a sculpture. Or the opposite way of saying that is that when you make a big thing that's completely enclosed, it could feel hollow or empty. And that interferes, or that's part of your conversation with the object. So I like for there to be some way to at least mentally access, for instance, those oval holes in the face of this bronze piece. And then the other thing I like to do when I'm approaching a show is try something new, a new process of some kind or a material I've never worked with, but so then I'm building on my skills. And for this show, these two pieces, I've never worked with sheet metal before. Actually, I take it back. A long time ago, one of those early commissions was partly sheet metal. But these two pieces are bent and rolled and welded. And this one's 1/4-inch aluminum, and this is bronze sheet. And I have not made anything out of that. I've done a lot of casting metals, particularly bronze, but not working with sheet. So that was interesting exploration for me. Let me just see what else there was. And I guess the last thing is that while I'm working on the show, beyond thinking about the specifics of the gallery and how this little family of works will relate to each other, I think about how each work relates to my larger body of work. I don't tend to think of my sculpture as, separate bodies of work. I don't do one thing for a while in one material, obviously. So I think about how each piece kind of relates to the larger family of work. And then lastly, the photographs. The past couple years, I've always worked with photography as a way of taking notes as I move through the world and noticing what types of forms I'm attracted to. And I've started really trying to look at those photographs. I have about 10 years worth of pictures that are very straightforward, at least in my mind. There's usually a thing in the middle of the picture. And so I can see very clearly what it was I was interested in. And then usually I remember taking the picture as well. But within those photographs, I see so much correlation. And sometimes I don't even realize it when I'm taking the picture. So it was a very intuitive process to come up with this. This is a little body of work, which I actually plan to continue for a while. But these puddles of glass that are suspended over the images, I'm not sure what to say. I kind of went crazy with the color. The texture's somewhat of a given. They're actually, it's a lost wax process. So they're made by taking sort of almost cool but still warm wax and dropping it in puddles on a very cold wet plaster bat. And what happens is that material then cools very quickly and leaves this type of pooling and patterning and lines that remind me of Japanese prints of drawings of water and mountains and clouds. And there's something about that kind of imagery in combination with the photography that's so incongruous that I think that I wanted to try to marry them. And so what I have is, I think, a kind of, what to me is an interesting tension in that they're suspended over the photograph, and I've given consideration to the shape of the glass within the composition of the photograph, but also to what part of the photograph is blocked and what you can and you can't see. So there's a lot of opposites going on in them. And that's probably the strongest theme. But I welcome your observations as well. So if you have any questions, maybe.
I have a question. I'm somewhat familiar with your work, and I've enjoyed this. And my question has to do with the difference between process and content. Because there's a lot of process here, there's a lot of obvious, you have affinities and things together. But particularly like the play out in photographs. Normally photographs are content filled. And so you described a little bit of the process here. How does content, is that important, or is that just a thing that happens to be there?
You know, it's not important in the large sense, in that I really don't consider myself an artist who's got some sort of agenda or statement that I want to accompany the work. I don't need you to understand this work in a specific way, but there is content for it for me personally, particularly when it comes to where the photography enters into my process. I think that's obscured for most people when it comes to the sculpture. I think the first sculpture that I ever really discovered and embraced was Donald Judd's. So I went through a whole period of really loving minimal work. And in fact, a lot of the early sculptural work I did with caramelized sugar and pastry and whatnot shows that vernacular. I would cast, very crisp slabs of caramelized sugar. And I wasn't trying to make some comment about the future of, or trying to gobble up minimalism or melt it down or reinterpret it. I really love the forms. So I'm not sure completely how to answer the question, but
Maybe talk about the title a little, because I think that's critical to how your process does work.
Yeah. See, I think of myself as so much more visual than verbal, and so we were like, when it came to a title for the show, we had a back and forth, and I think mutable came to me as opposed to immutable, as something really movable. I really like to think of sculpture as creating or providing some sort of platform for a dynamic interaction, so that the piece can feel like it's becoming something or changing as you move around it. I like to think of sculpture as being something that you want to look at from all the way around. So mutable came to me versus immutable object.
And the reiteration of form or shape in different materials too. I think when I think of these, I don't know if they're little clouds or how I think of this in relation to the puddles. There's a connection.
I should point out
the color too. In the form and the color.
I should point out that this piece can be set. These aren't fixed. These clouds or whatever they are. The rods come out every time you move the piece, so you can set it up again any way you'd like, sort of like arranging flowers or changing the shape of the piece in a way. You can't obviously have that interaction with it in a museum, but it does have that potential, or will have that life one day somewhere, even if it's just back in my studio.
You said these pieces are basically interchangeable, structurally interchangeable. This piece here, have you ever showed that any way other than how it is flat this way?
No, and this is the last piece that I finished for the show. All of these pieces were made within the past 3 months, with the exception of that piece. And I included that piece in the show because I knew that Jill really liked it. And I thought, I think this will work. I am so happy with this piece, I can't imagine wanting to stack it differently. But you know, I can't say if, you know, if it lives in my studio, comes back and lives in my studio for a while, and I see that it maybe has some potential to be exhibited separately. They're not connected. They just sit on each other. But the seams all line up. It's very beautifully made.
Where do you find your shapes?
Where do I find my shapes?
You know, 'cause sometimes I think they come out of photographs sometimes.
Yeah. Yes.
Is that something
Yes.
that you've seen somewhere that's in a completely, even mundane
Yes.
object or something, that's something in that strikes your imagination?
Mm-hmm. Well, and, you know, each piece has a different story as far as all that goes. The form of the oldest piece, the piece that's hanging, is actually the shape of this wicker chair that I grew up in watching TV in every afternoon as a kid. I came upon it in an apartment of a friend. I was like, oh my God, I know this chair. So I did a whole exhibition my exhibition previous to this dealt with that form. There were four different pieces dealing with that form. This is a heptahedron. After Donald Judd, Tony Smith really captured my attention for quite some time. And I made some heptahedrons out of glass. And this one I decided to go the complete opposite of glass, which would be, you know, perforated, sort of crude material like plaster. And I made that part of this piece in 2011, so it's been around for a while. This was this, I think, is a template for fitting a sink into a countertop. And I found this piece of cardboard, exactly that scale. In fact, we used it as the pattern for this piece. I also ended up working a lot with pattern. When I was a kid, I learned how to sew. And so, you know, one way to make things is to work with, you know, shaped pieces and how they fit together. So anyway, so I grabbed this thing out of the street, literally probably 10 years ago, and it's been under a table in my studio. And so I used that for that piece. I've worked with hexagons quite a lot in terms of packing hexagonal tubes. And in fact, I think the caramel piece I made for your show was hexagonal. It was like a log cabin piece. So that's kind of returning to a form that I like. And that piece, it's harder for me to describe where that came from, but some details on it came from photographs.
Well, I guess I understand that you created these objects for this space. You were given an idea of what the space would look like, so you kind of created the installation. Do you always create your installations every time you show?
Well, you know, I should say, I don't think of this as like a fixed installation. I did deliver the work and we moved things around, but they're not made specifically for this architectural space, so I don't think of them as site-specific that way. But yes, I almost always am concerned with how the pieces will talk to each other within a space. So in that way, while I could have arranged them differently, I think still the same conversations would be taking place. But yeah, I do try to have control. You know, Jill never really challenged me. She came to the studio. She comes into San Francisco several times a year, right? And she'd always make a trip to the studio and say, what are you doing now? Where are we? But she gave me a lot of space to put these pieces together. So I kind of tried to report back to her what I was doing to make sure she was on board, but she couldn't let me do.
It's gone through a lot of different iterations. Should there be anything on the wall? Shouldn't there?
Yeah.
You know, should there just be a few pieces? Gave you its size space.
Yes, and I had seen the room. I came up about 2 years ago, actually, so we've talked quite some time about doing a show.
And we had a piece of yours on loan a few years ago when Larry Paul was curator here. We did a minimalist abstract show, and we had your orange piece that had sort of, kind of reminiscent. of
Yeah,
glass.
perforations.
Yeah.
Mildred?
You said that you don't consider yourself a conceptual artist.
Oh, did I say that
Yeah.
today? Well, I don't. I consider myself a sculptor, really. Photographer, sculptor.
How do you feel that the conceptual movement in the San Francisco Bay Area has influenced your work?
Well, it's interesting because it certainly has. You know, I learned some things like studying with Paul Koss, who's a wonderful artist, and I consider him a conceptual artist. And one of the things he taught me that I've never forgotten is that a piece of art should be, it should not represent. And so I think when I realized I'm a sculptor, that's when I thought, well, I can make sculpture. I don't have to be serving some larger narrative content. But so that's when I say I think you need to walk around and look at every aspect of a sculpture. If it's good enough, you want to do that. That came from that lesson from Paul Koss. I think it got me going too with the early work, with the pastry work, having studied the conceptual artist in San Francisco. Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious, do you work alone or do you have an assistant?
I have an assistant. I've done it all. I had a full-time assistant at one point, and then I went through about a 5-year period where it's just me, and now I have an assistant again who particularly helps me with glass. These pieces are very it's a pretty time-consuming process called pâte de verre, and I have a young woman who comes and helps me 2 to 3 times a week with making investments, and she's actually super. I've started using her in other ways. Well, I should say I work with a fabricator on these 2 pieces, so these weren't made in my studio, and both of these pieces actually evolved as I worked with him. This was made in my studio, but it was made by my husband because we share a studio. And so I have access to a wood shop, which is great, and to all of his skills. And it evolved as well. We had a lot of conversations about it, where it was headed.
I was trying to imagine your studio.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, it's got different sections to it.
I've gotten.
It's fascinating. I mean, that's why I go, you know, and it's like, well, what are you working on now? We still have the photos up there, but then these things are over here.
Yeah, and it has years of work and experiments. I don't like to throw things away, so it's pretty dusty.
Sometimes they can interfere with one another, these different media.
Yes, you know, I learned that throwing a tarp over something can be really liberating, just to mute the the energy coming from it. And
Beautiful storage systems. I mean, some of the work is just so, I mean, the crates or the storage areas are gorgeous.
yeah, but you know, for many years I didn't have the patience to do it, and now I find that I do because I have to, and it feels good to me. For instance, when I said I've been going through these 10 years of photographs, I sat down and archived them all, and I've always found it really hard to sit down in front of a computer and do that, but we're mostly digital. They're all digital, actually, and so I did that, and I patted myself on the back for it.
Do you ever teach?
I do, but only sort of short gigs. But people will ask me to come and talk to their class or come and give a lecture and meet with grad students, and I really enjoy that. But I've never applied for a teaching position full time.
Now, it'll kill all your interest in performing.
Yeah, I just figured it would take me so long to figure out how to teach, not having gone to art school. I did take art classes here and there, and I've studied with really great artists, but you know, learning to teach is a real process. And I didn't start making art really until I was in my late 20s, 30, and then I had 2 kids. So they're just about to go to college. And I kind of feel like I'm back, sort of back to the beginning a little bit, which feels really good. Uh-huh.
When I was thinking about the permanence of your current body of work
Mhm.
as opposed to the impermanence of working with food.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if that's come into play for you and is that
Well, I found I just had this sort of knee-jerk thing about becoming known for ephemeral material. It was something that a lot of people were doing in the sort of the late 1990s and around 2000. I guess I started making pastry work in like 93 or 94, but I found it was really hard to clean a piece up off of the floor and throw it away. And and while I go back thinking it was a very good experience, I always yearned to work with more serious or permanent material, but I didn't have access to it, like formally. I didn't know how to approach a piece of marble. And I'm not sure I do yet marble, but I would love to work in marble, you know? So I feel like I've grown into more permanent material, both in like making something that I think should last and, you know, feeling like I have a way in that feels as intuitive as that work did.
Have you done any work for outdoors?
Only one piece. It was the one back in 1990. I'm thinking maybe I shouldn't do any public work. That was it. It was a serpentine wall made of fruitcake, and it was encased in an aluminum container. And it ended up feeling like a real strong conceptual statement about it. And it wasn't a way for me. I thought, well, fruitcake is a material that everyone understands the joke about it, you know. So if there's common material, if there's public material there, it's inherent in that. And I forget what else. It was a temporary project.
You know, if you go to UVA, you can't not see a serpentine wall.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah.
you know, everywhere.
Yeah, but I think also the way that people just, at least for a while, and when that piece went up, there was all this furor ongoing. Every time someone did a sculpture in San Francisco that got any public monies, there was some complaint about, you know, I can't believe we're spending this on public art. So I kind of felt like, you know, people dump on public art very, you know, regularly in this country. So that was sort of part of it as well. So anyway, I fucking lost my train of thought.
Is that intuitive or?
Yes, yeah. You know, for a long time I didn't add color to my pieces. I just worked with sort of a raw material like here and let it be. But now I've realized it's a whole layer of that a sculpture can have, and I do tend to work with it pretty intuitively. But I like strong color, obviously. I've never made anything pastel. I think I can say that. Except for maybe that pink cloud over there. Yeah. Uh-huh.
I'm confused about the blobs. You said they're made of glass,
Mm-hmm.
but then you describe wax.
Yes.
So I don't understand the relationship between the wax and the.
Well, the glass puddles are cast from wax. It's a lost wax process, which is probably the way, you know, if you have a ring, the way your ring was made. You make the model that you want to cast in wax, and then you make an investment around it and melt the wax out, so you have a negative space. And I often think about, I loved photography and the sort of positive negative thing. And
So are these puddles hollow?
no, they're about a 1/4 inch thick, so they're flat. They're made with a 2-part mold in a kiln filled with crushed glass and weights on top of the mold. So as the glass melts and fills the space and contracts in volume, the weight comes down and makes sure that it presses completely into the mold. So they started in wax. In fact, I fell in love with a wax thing that was just an accident, and I thought, oh gee, this is really cool. Maybe I could make it into glass. Maybe I could see what this would look like in glass. And then I started making more of them and trying them in different colors. I didn't want to repeat any colors. Why do that? And then they found their way to the photography. So it was kind of a whole process.
The design in each puddle was there in wax.
Mm-hmm. And so they're unique. They're you know, the wax got melted out of the mold and that was it. If it cast well, great, and if not, it was gone. Easy to make more. Mm-hmm.
Well,
All right.
we
Well,
need
thank
to
you.
move on,
Yes.
so I want to thank you very much.
You bet.